All right, guys, so we're back to finish talking about what the Americans did now that they were their own independent nation. Okay, they were free from Britain. We know that in the last video we talked about how they came to an agreement called the Treaty of Paris, and the treaty was an agreement between two or more nations. And we're now officially the United States of America. We won the war. No one thought we could do it, but we did it, right? And now what? Okay, we're just sort of stuck here. We're our own nation, but what do we do now? We don't have King George taxing us. We don't have anybody telling us what to do. We don't have soldiers living in our houses anymore. What do we do? How does a new nation begin? Okay, so this was a big problem. Now, I'm on page 196 in my social studies book, and we're going to talk about how our country, how America, what it was at that point, how it started out. So picture it's just like a little baby country, right? It has no rules, no laws, nothing. Everyone's just kind of doing what they want. It wasn't crazy, but it wasn't controlled, okay? So we did have a Congress. Remember talking about the Continental Congress? And it was a lot of like those leaders from colonies coming together and talking about maybe trying to set up some sort of government. But this was the problem. A lot of the people in charge, so a lot of the delegates, they were afraid of turning into what they were before. So they did not want a king. They did not want someone to be controlling them. They kind of wanted each of the colonies, which were now called states, they wanted each of them to sort of be able to just manage themselves, okay? So they created a document called the Articles of Confederation, and you'll see me refer to that as the AOC, okay? Our very first government was called the Articles of Confederation or the AOC, all right? I'm going to read to you a little bit about that, and then I'm going to talk about it. After declaring independence from Great Britain, the Second Continental Congress approved a document called the AOC, Articles of Confederation. These articles created a very weak government. This Congress managed the war against Great Britain. It also worked to solve common problems. So the Congress could declare war and pass laws, so they could pass laws made, but they had to have 9 out of the 13 states agree to that. So at this point, there were only 13 states. And in order to pass a law or to approve something, 9 of the states all had to agree. That did not happen very often. The new government had no president and no court to settle arguments between states. So maybe New Jersey was fighting with Pennsylvania over something. There was nobody there to help that or to say you're right and you're wrong. There was no one to settle any arguments. So then you kind of got states on the sides of other states. It wasn't really a good government. Once the American Revolution ended, the Confederation Congress, which was the Congress that made the Articles of Confederation, had a hard time solving the new country's problems. Most of the powers were held by the states, so that meant the states were in charge of themselves. Each state still issued its own money, and Congress had no power to collect taxes. So do you remember how we had the soldiers that we couldn't pay? Even if we wanted to pay them after the war was ended, there was no way for this government to collect money. It was all up to the individual states. It could not support a national army to protect American citizens or pay the soldiers who fought, like I just said. Many former soldiers, so I'm on page 196 right now, many former soldiers and poor farmers lost their homes because they couldn't pay their bills. Do you know why they couldn't pay their bills? Because they weren't working. Instead of working, they were fighting to win the Revolutionary War. And even though we won, there was no way to pay them. So they lost their farms. They lost their businesses. Okay? This was all they had back then. So it was a really, really hard time as our country started out as a brand new country, like a baby country. Some of the farmers were jailed because they couldn't pay. One farmer complained, "The great rich men are going to get all we have, and I think it's time for us to rise and put a stop to it." In Massachusetts, a former soldier named Daniel Shays agreed. He and hundreds of other men took part in an armed revolt. So now, here we are. We won the Revolutionary War. We're free from Britain. But we were not even happy with the government that we had now. So they weren't even helping the colonists who fought in this war. There was no way for them to help. So Daniel Shays and hundreds of other men took part in a revolt. Okay, they tried to stop the state courts from taking people's properties. Their fight against the government became known as Shays' Rebellion. So that's something you can look up separately if you want to. This violence worried the nation's leaders, and some saw the need for a stronger government. So the AOC was our government. People were not happy. There was no president, nobody in charge, no one to help the states. Each state was pretty much its own government. And they compared it to a one-legged stool. So I'm going to draw you a little picture, okay? They don't say it in the book, but in our old social studies book, it was a really great picture that they had. And they said that the AOC was like a one-legged stool. So you know I can't draw. I'm no Miss Sikowski. But I'm going to draw you like a one-legged stool. Okay? That kind of looks like a nail. But anyway, picture a one-legged stool. Can a one-legged stool hold itself up? What happens if you sit on that stool? It would topple over, right? There was no support. So the AOC was a very, very, very weak government. It could not hold anything up. And in that case, we needed to come up with a new form of government that would be able to make laws and pass laws. And even though we didn't want a king, maybe we had to have somebody who was kind of in charge, okay? And we're going to talk all about this as we get into the next chapter in social studies. So I'm just giving you a little quick overview. But the first thing you need to know is the AOC, Articles of Confederation, were our first government. It was too weak. It did not work. So we needed to form a new government. Know that, okay? We made a new government called, well, I shouldn't say government. We made a new document, which it was a government, a new document called the Constitution. So the first government was called Articles of Confederation, all right, the AOC. And we said it was too weak. It was too weak. It was a one-legged stool. All right. Our new government, I'm just writing these notes. I don't know if you're going to look at them or you're just listening to me, was called the Constitution. And that is the government, that's the document that we still use today in 2020. The Constitution. Okay. And that's the government that we still use today. They compared that to a three-legged stool that was nice and strong. We've got a couple different parts of the Constitution. We have different branches that all check each other, and we're going to talk more about that. But for your last part of this informational writing, you're just going to tell me our first form of government was the Articles of Confederation. It was too weak. It was like a one-legged stool. So Congress had to come up with a new government, and they created a document called the Constitution, okay? And it explained how our government would work. It was nice and strong, and we still use it today. All right? I'm going to check in with some of you throughout the week as we talk about this, but refer to my first video for your first paragraph and the second video, which is this one, for your second paragraph. All right? You guys are going to be great. I can't wait to read these. And remember to use page 188 and 196 to help you. All right? Okay, get started.